Good evening and welcome. I also am glad to see you here. My name is Barry Foster, and I am, as of January 1st, the new interim pastor here, serving First Christian. So this is my first Christmas Eve with you. The story's a familiar one, right? We've got Mary and Joseph going from Nazareth to Bethlehem, and baby's born, laid down in a feed trough, and shepherds, and then wise men. We know the story, right? It's a beloved story. It's a familiar story. It's immensely significant to us. If you were telling that story, though, in the first century, say right after it happened, it wouldn't have seemed very notable. It wouldn't have seemed very important at all. I mean, basically it's this. It's tax time. When isn't it tax time? Okay? You got two unmarried peasants who are going from one obscure village to another crowded, obscure village that nobody who doesn't live in those villages cares about. They're unmarried, but she's pregnant. Okay? She's going to have a baby. The baby's born and stuck in a feed trough. Hey, it's better than the ground. You know, as long as you can keep the cows from chewing on the kid's hair, it's probably, it's better than most people would have had, or a lot of people anyway. There's absolutely nothing noteworthy about it, nothing unusual, nothing to give any attention to. Because I don't want to offend any mothers here, but life keeps going on and the rest of the planet isn't paying any attention to your baby. I mean, that's just reality, okay? And nearly everyone in that day was blind to what had just happened, because no one was keeping track of the births of babies of peasants. They just didn't. Kids sleeping in a feed trough. Hey, my mom put me in a dresser drawer. I slept in a dresser drawer for several weeks and months because we couldn't afford a bed, okay? It's not that big a deal. And if the baby's born, that's great, but unless you're a celebrity or a really important political figure or something, nobody's paying any attention to it after the first day. I mean, except your relatives and your close friends, and they have to. There's no publicity. There's no PR campaign. Nobody's tweeting anything. Obscure towns, obscure people, unremarkable events. And the Son of God is born into the world. Now, God wasn't ashamed of his Son. It's not as if he had to sort of slip him in secretly to hide him in case anybody found out. That's not what's going on. In fact, he's thrilled. Did you notice that he hired the angel band to play when the kid is born, right? But who does he announce his son's birth to? He announces him to some shepherds. Now, for us, we think, oh, neat, the shepherds, they're standing by the side in the creche and everything's looking great. Not so in the first century. Shepherds were despised. They were the underclass. In fact, the best views of them were that they were distasteful. And the worst views of them is that they were untrustworthy and undesirable, liars and thieves. You didn't want to have anything to do with them. And this is the group as a whole that's regarded as disdainful. This is the group that God announces the birth of his Son to. Because God delights in using the small, the lowly, the overlooked. He delights in coming to the common, the unimportant. God is quite comfortable among the poor. He's quite comfortable among the lower classes. He's quite at home with people who are overlooked by everyone else. He is never concerned about human measurements of status. And that doesn't matter whether that's popular culture status, celebrity status, athletic status, political status, or just the status rankings at the construction site or around the water cooler or in your office. He's not concerned about that at all. My wife's going to help me here. When I was a kid, we didn't have a lot of money, but Mom always found a way to make Christmas really great. And her Christmases were marked by generosity and creativity. And one way we saved money was to wrap our presents in newspaper. And if you were lucky, you got the comics or the sports page. And you could either have nice gifts wrapped in newspaper, or you could have not quite as nice gifts and spend money on the wrapping paper. That's basically how it went down at our house. But go ahead and start opening that, because one of the things I've learned is that God loves to hide his treasures, some of his most precious treasures, in places you can't easily find. And inside a newspaper-wrapped present when we were growing up would often be something really remarkable. Now, in this case, I don't know what you were expecting, but this is just our Christmas offering. It's not a lot, but it's more than you might have thought if you just saw the newspaper, right? Thanks. Good job. You can drive on the road that goes from Estes Park over Trail Ridge, Trail Ridge Road, that road down to Grand Lake. And if you stop along the way near one of the turnoffs where you can get off the side of the road, you can go up a walkway into an alpine meadow. And there on the tundra, usually hidden behind some rocks, you can find some of the most beautiful flowers that you've ever seen, and they only grow up in the tundra way above where people usually go. In fact, you have to go out of your way to try to find these flowers, to see them. It's like God hid them there for those who are willing to go and look. Do you know what a nebula is? Not a nebulizer, that's what you do for your kid when they've got the croup. No, the nebula, these gas and dust clouds that are like galaxy size, the birthplace of stars. They've been there for millions of years. We haven't even been able to see them except for about the last 40, 50 years maybe a little bit longer. Hidden, there all the time, but hidden. The most beautiful things in the universe. Diamonds. How many of you have diamonds lying around your backyard? Just right? No. People. Followers of Jesus Christ who display Jesus in very quiet and simple ways, who never draw attention to themselves. They don't tweet about what they did or boast about what they're going to do because they're not looking for acclaim or celebrity status. Jesus tells about little mustard seeds. They're so small you can't even hardly see them, but they grow up to be a plant that's big enough to have birds' nests in them. It says it gives shade to the nations. Jesus had some people that came after him. They were pretty unimpressive, individually and collectively. He said, this is the people that I'm going to give myself to, going to change the world. 200 years ago tonight, this is the 200th anniversary, there was a pastor of a small church in Austria, a place called Oberndorf. He was working on his Christmas Eve service. It was, interestingly enough, the name of it was St. Nicholas Church. But he had a Christmas Eve service to prepare for. He was trying to prepare for it. And he had a poem that he wanted to use. He'd written it a couple of years before. He wanted to use it for the night, but the organ wasn't working. And I don't know if that was because the organist was gone, because that was often the case. The organ was broken, because that was also often the case. Or if the guy just wasn't available. And so he had a man that he knew who often filled in for him as an organist, and he said, could you set this poem to music for two voices in the choir and guitar. And so with only a few hours to work with, the organist did so, put it to music. Franz Gruber was his name, and he composed a little piece which they performed at the midnight service. It was fairly well received. It had got some applause. They liked it. That was about last we heard of it until about a year later, a visiting choir director came and got the score, found out about it, took it back and to where he'd come from and gave it to two sets of singing families who began to include it in their repertoire, and gradually it became popular around the rest of Europe and spread. In just a few moments, we're going to sing that song, that poem, Stille Nacht, Silent Night, one of the most widely known, widely sung Christmas hymns, even by people who don't know Jesus at all. And it began because an obscure pastor in an obscure church gave a poem that no one had ever heard of to somebody to put to music on a guitar. I don't know why you came here tonight. Maybe this is a regular stop for you. Maybe you're visiting family and this is a regular stop for them. Maybe you're just being nice to them, or maybe you really like this. Maybe you saw people in the parking lot and thought there was going to be a party or something and came in. Maybe you're one of those who think if I come into a church on Christmas, maybe God will look favorably on me or something. I'll get the checkbox checked off and I'm good for another year. God's hiding something here tonight for you. Because the gospel of Jesus Christ isn't about you checking off boxes or showing up at certain services or saying the right things, or it's not about you being gooder so he'll like you better. It's not about making promises to try harder. The gospel of Jesus Christ, it's unlikely, it's obscured by a lot of religious overpainting kind of stuff. But the gospel is this: the living God took on human flesh in a baby. He didn't stay a baby, though. He grew up and he became a man. And he lived and he died because you and I were sinful. And it was the only way to get us back. And if you want to come back, then it's for you to say yes to the gift. It's not about proving that you're good enough to love. He already loves us. He gave his son. He became one of us so that we could come back. The bridge, if you will, for us to come back. And he says, we sang it. Greg read it. To all those who received him, he gave them the power to become sons and daughters of the living God. And that's what's offered to you this Christmas. Silent Night, Holy Night, this one that we're singing joy to the world about, let all the earth receive their King. He's offering us himself. So as you think about your life, your family, your friends this Christmas, what you're going to do next, the wonderful celebration that I hope you have tonight and tomorrow and on through the new year, that can actually be enhanced and better than you've ever imagined if you just offer your heart to Jesus. If you'll let him be the one who says, I'll be your Lord, I'll be your Savior, I'll come in and live inside of you. You can do that in your own words, a simple prayer. But prepare your heart, because God is going to continue to use the unlikely and the unimportant and the small and the overlooked. And that includes this church and that includes you. Because he delights in it. He's not looking for someone to run a PR campaign for him. He really doesn't need one. He just wants people who will let Jesus be Lord so that he can live his life out through them and show what a fantastic God he is to people, many of whom will walk right past him, won't even see it. But they might see you, and they might hear you if you let Jesus come in to you. Will you do that tonight? Will you consider that? That's my prayer, that you will.